Hi everyone and welcome to Pro Tools Answers, where we discuss, demonstrate and elaborate on your Pro Tools questions put to the community in the official Avid Pro Tools support forum on Facebook. My name is Dave, ACI and lecturer for Point Blank Music Schools in the UK, and with me as ever are two of the rawest recluses in all of audio engineering. Say hi to Anders from Avid Learning Partner Soundcraft in Austria. And keeping us in check is Master Instructor and Avid Curriculum Manager over in Tokyo. Say hi to Andy.
Hello, hello.
Now, our subject today has been inspired by Joeseph, and it's an interesting one. It centers all around using mixers as interfaces. His question is this: I'm using my X32 as my I/O interface for Pro Tools. I'm getting input signal, but I'm not getting any output signal to the XLR outs 1 and 2 on my X32. In the pic below are the outputs circled, the outputs Pro Tools is referring to. I'm not quite sure he's circled outputs 1 and 2, actually. Those are the main outputs there, and those are all of the auxiliary outputs, I believe. But anyway, so what we're talking about is we're going to be using our mixer as an interface. Now, the difference between using a mixer as an interface and using an interface as an interface is how Pro Tools deals with the output system. Because in a regular interface, if we head over to I/O settings, the output tab tends to list all of the physical outputs on our interface, but when we're using a mixer, Pro Tools references all of the channels on the mixer. So what we have to do is we have to return Pro Tools into the mixer itself, and then the routing to your speakers or to headphone amps is going to be done within the mixer's own mixing architecture. So in the output tab, I'm going to designate channels 31 and 32 as my door return. And I'm going to write door return 31, 32, and I'm going to call that actual. And I'm going to go to bus, and I'm going to rename the bus itself as door return SL32, because I'm using a Pro Tools SL32. So now if I click OK, we can see that all of the outputs here, if I just hold down Alt, all of the outputs are representing door return SL32, and that's linking to the door return channels 31 and 32 on the desk itself. Now, all of our channels are set that way. Okay, so if we flip over to the app, we have to do a couple of things in the app. First of all, we have to head over to channels 31 and 32, and we have to select them, and we have to set the input for that particular channel to USB, because it's going to be receiving the channel from Pro Tools via the USB. Signal will be routed through Pro Tools, through channels 31 and 32, and then if we put the main master up on the mixer, it's going to show us signal in the main masters. And it doesn't really get any more complicated than that. Where it does just require a little bit more four-dimensional thinking is that you have to think of the outputs now as the individual channels on the mixer and not physical outputs on the back of the mixer.
So let's pause for a second, because I want to make sure I understand what's going. Because, like I said, this is not my workflow, and I want to make sure that I'm not going to ask a really dumb question. Mm-hmm. Each one of your individual tracks in the Pro Tools mixer is going out DAW return actual, right?
Yes. So everything is being routed through channels 31 and 32
inside Pro Tools.
Inside Pro Tools.
Okay, so you're mixing inside the box.
Yeah, mixing in Pro Tools, it's just that the entire output is being routed to these two channels on the desk.
Right. Okay. So
for the purposes of monitoring.
Right. So then those two channels inside the application for the board, then you're taking that actual input and then you're routing out the output that goes to your monitor speakers.
That's correct, yes. So if we wanted to route through the main output, it just comes out of the main output or automatically when you turn the channels up. If you wanted to route any of that door return to any of the other auxiliary outputs, we just have to do a little bit of work through the regular monitoring system.
Right, okay. So, great. No, this is really good because what you're doing is you're mixing inside the box, but you're taking advantage of the multitude of outputs for things like Q mixes and other things inside your mixing board audio interface. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So all that this is doing is just sending the 2-track out through the mixer to be able to monitor it.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say with an interface, you just do that through the 1 and 2 output. It goes to the speakers, but with the desk, we have a couple more layers to go through.
Yeah, and I'll add that with a lot of interfaces that aren't desks, there is still some routing flexibility inside of even smaller interfaces. Of course, it takes it to a whole new level when you're dealing with that many inputs and outputs. So what people don't know when they watch this is that we actually get along really, really well, the three of us. And this is an opportunity for me to show my man crush on Dave Phillips because he's doing two things that I absolutely adore. One is in the bus tab, he's naming the bus for what it does, and he's naming the output path for what it is. Oh. And a lot of times what I see a lot of folks doing is they'll create their output paths, and Pro Tools automatically creates new buses with the exact same name as the output path that you created. So if you take a look at all those other ones that Dave isn't using in this case, they're basically their output paths with a bus that is of the same exact name. And it's a waste of detail in my view. And so what Dave has done is he's specifically named the output of the one that's going to the actual board, right? And that's great. And he actually enumerates the output channels and numbers. But that's not important inside the Pro Tools mixer. All we need to know is where it's going to go and what it's doing. So in the bus, he just says, this is going to the SL32. Great. Fantastic. I do the same thing. Like I have a bus called main mon, which is my main monitor. It can go anywhere. And I don't do a lot of my routing work based upon default names. I use custom names for both mapped and unmapped buses. So I think that's number one of the thing that I like as a Pro Tools user of what you're doing in this workflow. The second thing that I like about what you're doing is in the output tab, and you've taken the time to do something that isn't technically necessary for your workflow. So what Dave has done is he has assigned a monitor path. So if you go into monitor path, he has assigned that to DAW return 3132 actual, right? Now he could assign it to no output, and his system is going to work exactly the same way as it always did. So what he's doing is a courtesy to me, right? Because when Pro Tools is playing on Dave's system, it will go, everything that's going to his main monitor is going to go out that output. Okay, so that you are telling in Pro Tools, you're saying that is the output of this studio that is attached to the monitor speakers, 31 and 32. Great. If he gives the exact same session to me, I don't even have 32 channels of output in my studio. And they're certainly not attached to any speakers. I'm a normal person, so I'm attached to 1 and 2, right?
Relatively speaking, normal.
I completely normal. Forget about it. And what I do is I will set on the monitor path outputs 1 and 2. That's connected to my speakers. So the cool thing is when Dave gives me a session, everything that was connected to his 3132 will automatically remap itself without me doing anything to 1 and 2, as long as two things are true. As long as Dave has chosen a monitor path and as long as I have chosen a monitor path. Now, I'm 1 and 2, right? Now, Anders, his left and right is 1 and 3 because he's got a 5.1 or 7.1 setup. And so in his setup, where he's doing a lot of post, his stereo output could be 1 and 3. And as long as he's got that set up as his stereo monitor path, boom, it automatically remaps. And that's one of the great things that's quietly happened in Pro Tools that really helps to take the rough edges out of workflow. And so from all of us to all of you, Dave, thank you for naming your buses, and thank you for setting a monitor path.
It's the little things, I know.
It's a little thing.
Now, once we've set that, if we head to output, we can see that we've got a hellish amount of channels there to deal with, but I only need one of them, right? So we can do a little bit of cleaning up. We can head to I/O. We can just select everything that we're not using. We'll delete it all. Click OK, and then when we want to do any more routing, it's just all very, very easily laid out because there's only one output that we can select. But we can still go that little bit further here because we can also set queue outputs. You know, we've got 32 channels that we can route this thing back to. This desk has, I think it's 16 auxiliaries off the top of my head. I can't really remember, which, 8 stereos. So we could have potentially 8 headphone Q mixes outputs on this thing. So we could set up to begin with, actually. Let's create ourselves a new stereo path. We'll call that Q1. And we'll link that to 30 and 29. Head to bus. And let's see. So Q1. What did I say the channels were? Yes. 29 and 30? 29 and 30. Yeah. We'll call those actual as well. So that Andy thinks I know what I'm doing. And then we'll call that Q1 output as well. So we'll click OK. That's linked to physical outputs 29, 30. So returning to channels 29 and 30. And then we can stripe a send. We can now send all of our channels to channels 29 and 30. So again, in the mixer, we'll set those to return to the USB channel. If we hit play, we'll be able to see signals going through both of those. But the thing is, being a return channel for headphones, we don't necessarily want that to come through the front of house to the producer. We just want to be sending those to just the artist. So we can just simply turn those down, set these channels to be pre-fade, and then send those through the an auxiliary output, a specific auxiliary output, to whichever outputs the headphone amp is connected to.
Okay, so Dave, are you ever doing like stems from Pro Tools for a live show? So you might have the drums to one group or one fader on the mixing console, and maybe backing tracks and backing vocals or something like that?
Okay, so doing a live show and using Pro Tools to play backing tracks all going through the same board.
You might have other instruments with live inputs, but you're using Pro Tools also for some backing tracks, yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so yeah, very easy. So we've got, this is going to be a click track right here. You wouldn't know it, but we can tell that it's a click track. So what we would do is let's go to I/O setup and just default everything. Then what channel would you like your click track to go out, Anders?
Okay, let's do output 21 or 22. I'm not sure why.
Okay, so what would do you want?
I just need a monoclick. I'm not that sensitive.
So I'll send it out of output 21, and then over on the desk we'll select output 21. We'll name it. Click. Then when the band is playing, you can have Pro Tools playing back, and it will play this thing through the mixer. Mm-hmm.
So that the drummer can hear that in his headphone, yeah? So Dave, would you be worried about getting some kind of error in Pro Tools? And what if the Pro Tools machine suddenly stops while in the middle of the gig?
I would be a little bit concerned if I had that with a computer that was throwing up random errors every so often. I mean, we're not using any plugins on this. Well, we might be using a little bit of processing. So it might be a concern.
Yeah,
So
the perfect situation for this is in
thinking?
setup playback engine. There's a function called the host engine optimize performance at... it's the ignore errors doing playback and record. So the next button there, which is...
Let's start that one again.
So in playback, in setup playback engine, there is the perfect function for this. You have the ignore errors during playback and record. So what it does is basically if Pro Tools throws an error message, it has some kind of a problem. Usually Pro Tools will stop and show you the warning sign. And that's exactly what we want. We want to be notified if Pro Tools has a problem. But engaging the ignore errors during playback and record will let Pro Tools power through any problems it has. And basically it will stop at nothing to provide you a stable output. So I wouldn't ever use this in the studio other than if I have something that cannot stop. But if I'm doing a live show, like you would be here providing stems, or even recording a live show that can't break down in the middle of a song or something, I engage this ignore errors during playback and record. And
great. So we're making a really nice stable playback system that can output multiple tracks to multiple parts of the mixer for the purposes of, it's almost like you can mix the backing track live.
Right. I would also make it a point to freeze any tracks that have any plugins on them. Freeze all the tracks, frankly, just to make sure that you're using the very least amount of CPU as you possibly can, and RAM. The other thing I might consider, because I'm an adamant enemy of ignore errors during playback and record, because I don't like that quite at all. But if you get rid of all the plugins, assume that you've frozen all your tracks and you have zero need for RAM for your plugins, that means you can use the RAM for disk caching. And that makes for faster, more responsive, and arguably more reliable playback, because it's not dealing with a hard drive. You're taking one thing out of the equation. So that's another thing I would do. But folks do this all the time in the real world. Is for big shows, they have Pro Tools playing backing tracks. Do they take really good care of those computers? Yes, they do. And do they have backups of those computers? That's and those backups are running synced with the originals. So for big shows that can't have any problems, they'll they take this quite seriously, and they'll do everything that's needed to keep that computer clean and running.
I have one more little.
Yeah, there's nowhere to hide when you're on
I have
stage.
one more little hack for playing back stems live. And that's something I never ever use in Pro Tools, is in options menu. Go under scrolling options. So usually I'm in no scrolling, but when I'm playing live and I'm standing at the mixer and I quickly just want to know where I am, I'll be in continuous scrolling. And Pro Tools will scroll continuously, and in the middle of the screen I will have the playback cursor, right? So it's fixated. And this is the only time that I ever use continuous scrolling. I know it's a bit of a system or resource hog, but I love the way it works, because I can at a glance know exactly where I am in the session. And if I'm using the continuous scrolling when I'm working in the studio, if I'm staring at the screen for more than 1 minute, I get kind of seasick. Everything starts turning in my room. I don't know why, but when I'm using Pro Tools Live, I'm in continuous scrolling.
A second point where we can agree to disagree. I don't. I'll specifically leave no scrolling on, because it's the one that uses the least amount of system resources. Continuous scrolling, arguably.
Yeah, I know that, but I need to know where I am in the If I need to know, at least I will do that. But I really haven't had any problems with live playback through Pro Tools during live shows. It's been extremely stable for me, partly because of what you mentioned, Andy, freezing as much as you can or committing tracks, which makes your life a lot easier.
It's interesting to look at this thing from a slightly different perspective. I mean, I quite like having a mixer in the studio that can actually be the hub of everything. You know, you get quite a lot of interfaces for the money. If you do live stuff, it's dual purpose. That's why I have this, because I mix live as well as use it in the studio. So rather than having two separate control surfaces, it inserts really nicely. DAW mode needs a little bit of work. The Huey integration for Presonus isn't fantastic. But if you're using something like the Allen and Heath SQ series, that works really well. Less inputs for the money, but still very nice sounding boards. So they're a really good alternative to interfaces. If you want to spend a little bit of extra money, but it's just lots of bang for buck. And they sound.
And let's not forget, Dave, it's one more use of Pro Tools, that people tend to always be focused on what they are actually doing, maybe recording at their home or at their studio, but outputting stuff through a mixing console is something that's being done. I mean, it's one of the things that
absolutely
Pro Tools can do.
Yeah, so if you're working in a live band that also uses backing track elements, you don't just have to bounce it all to a single stereo backing track with the click on one side and the track on the other. If you've got this and you've got Pro Tools, you could just do everything live on stage. Give your mixer a lot of extra control over all of the individual elements. It's great suggestion, Anders. So let's wind it up then. We've done a lot of talking about mixery stuff. Joeseph, hope that answered your question. If any of you guys are also using mixers in your studio and live as well, hopefully it's given you a few other things to think about too. So all leaves me to say is, if you haven't yet done so, please subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon so that you get notified of all of our new videos. Head over to ProToolsAnswers.com. You can subscribe over there and get updates every week. Andy sends out a nice little email just reminding you about what we're up to. And if you want to support Pro Tools Answers, you can head over to patreon.com/Pro Tools Answers, where you may be able to take advantage of some insanely cool subscriber benefits as well. So all leaves me to say is thank you very much to Anders. Thank you very much to Andy.
You bet.
My name's Dave. This is Pro Tools Answers, and we're out.